Hi, and welcome to the Bible Tribe with Seeing Deep Ministries, where we see deep in a shallow world and overcome the battles of the mind with the Word of God. Sometimes we can feel like we take one step forward and two steps backward. Yet any progress is still progress, and moving in God's favor accomplishes more than just our purposes. Ultimately, striving will not yield what we desire unless God is with us. We're reading today from the book of Nehemiah, chapters 1 through 3, and the verse of the day is Nehemiah 2, verse 8b. And the king granted them to me because the good hand of my God was with me. In context, since we are starting a new book, I found this background information on Enduring Word Commentary to be very helpful. Some 1,000 years after the time of Moses and some 400 years before the birth of Jesus, the nation of Israel and the Jewish people were in a desperate state. Their nations were destroyed. First, the northern Jewish kingdom of Israel, and then the southern Jewish kingdom of Judah. The city of Jerusalem was completely conquered by the Babylonians, and the once glorious Temple of Solomon was destroyed. When the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, they deported almost everyone from the city and the region. For some 70 years, Jerusalem was something of a ghost town, with the potential to end up like many ancient cities, completely forgotten, except to history. When the Jews were deported to Babylon, they began to make homes for themselves there. They settled down, and many still followed the God of their fathers, but they did it from Babylon, with no desire to return to the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Some of these faithful Jews were raised up to places of prominence in the governments they were deported to. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego became leaders in Babylon. Esther was made queen in the courts of a Persian king. But after 70 years of captivity in Babylon, they were given the opportunity to return to their homeland, the promised land. Out of some 2 or 3 million Jews deported from the land, only 50,000 decided to return to the promised land. That's only something like 2%. But they did return, and in the days of Ezra, they rebuilt the temple and laid a spiritual foundation for Israel once again. The book of Nehemiah begins 15 years after the book of Ezra ends, almost 100 years after the first captives came back to the promised land, and some 150 years after the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. After this long time, the walls of the city of Jerusalem were still in a rubble. Nehemiah recognized that God's hand in his life and calling was the difference. Nehemiah was willing to risk speaking to the king and rebuilding in the face of utter destruction. I chose the keyword hand, which is the Hebrew word yad. It means control, power, strength, direction, and care. Thought of the day: any progress is still progress. Application: God's sovereignty over our lives and calling is greater than anything that tries to hinder that calling. Go with God and His precious word, friends. Tune in tomorrow as we begin the book of Malachi.